Hello everyone, welcome to Hopeful Moments 1. Today, we're going to explore an emotional story about marital disagreements, when the line between offering help and overstepping boundaries becomes blurred. This story revolves around a wife whose younger sister frequently visits their home on weekends. At first, the husband was only mildly uncomfortable with her frequent visits and long stays. However, when she started letting herself in unannounced and using household appliances, such as the blender, the situation became tense. Surprisingly, the husband's attitude shifted significantly. Initially, he only asked his wife to talk to her sister about limiting visits on weekdays to maintain a quieter home. But when things didn't change the way he expected, he reacted strongly, raising his voice and even calling his sister-in-law a freeloader. This not only hurt the wife but also made her question, was this just momentary frustration, or did her husband truly harbor resentment toward her sister and family? Today's story isn't just about a family argument, it's a lesson about boundaries, respect, and how to handle conflicts in marriage. Do you think the husband overreacted, or did he have a valid reason to be upset? If you've ever been in a similar situation, share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story and want to hear more real-life experiences filled with valuable lessons, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Hopeful Moments 1. On Sunday morning, my younger sister visited again after finishing her morning jog in a nearby park. This had become her weekend routine, enjoying the fresh air, the gentle morning sun, and the peaceful streets before the city fully woke up. She liked to savor those moments before starting her day, and our home had become her usual stop, a place where she could sit down, enjoy a refreshing drink, share a few stories, and feel as comfortable as if she were in her own home. We had previously agreed that she could visit on weekends. Partly because I wanted to spend time with her, catching up after a busy week, and partly because I understood that she also needed a familiar place to unwind after exercising. However, this arrangement wasn't just about personal preferences, it was a necessary adjustment in my family. In the past, my sister visited quite frequently, sometimes on weekdays after work. She didn't just drop by to chat, she helped me a lot, cleaning the house, soothing the baby, and assisting with small tasks that a new mother like me deeply appreciated. Her presence not only gave me much-needed breaks but also created rare opportunities for my husband and me to have short but precious date nights, something we barely had since our baby was born. But for my husband, her frequent presence was an entirely different issue. To him, our home was the one place where he could truly relax after long, exhausting workdays, a retreat from the outside world's noise and demands. Having my sister over so often made him feel like his personal space was shrinking, as if our home was no longer fully ours. To balance family bonds with our own comfort, we reached a compromise. My sister could still visit, but only on weekends. It seemed like a reasonable solution, a way to maintain my closeness with her without disrupting the equilibrium of our home life. Yet, even with this agreement, things didn't always go smoothly. After a sleepless night with our baby, my husband and I were still deep in exhaustion on Sunday morning. The baby had been fussy all night, waking up for feedings, tossing and turning, leaving us without a moment of true rest. I remember trying to soothe the baby until nearly dawn, my eyes burning with fatigue, my body drained as if every ounce of energy had been sucked away. When I finally lay down, it felt like I had only been asleep for a few minutes before the morning light seeped through the curtains. Wrapped in soft blankets, I was too tired to notice anything else. I didn't even realize that my sister had texted me to ask if she could stop by. My phone sat silently on the nightstand, its screen dark as if sympathizing with my exhaustion, refusing to vibrate and wake me up. I was simply too drained to check my messages, too worn out to think of anything other than catching bits of broken sleep. Meanwhile, something unexpected was unfolding downstairs. My sister, who already had a key to the house, quietly let herself in, trying not to make much noise. Perhaps she assumed we were awake, or maybe she just didn't want to disturb us, like she had done so many times before. To her, our home wasn't just her sister's house, it was a familiar space where she felt at ease. Without hesitation, she headed straight to the kitchen, opened the fridge, and gathered the usual ingredients to make her post-run smoothie. The kitchen filled with soft noises as she took out a glass, placed ingredients on the counter, and shut the fridge door with a gentle click. The crisp sound of ice cubes dropping into the blender followed. Then, she turned on the machine, the steady hum of the motor sliced through the morning quiet. For me, those sounds blended into my dreams, not strong enough to pull me from the depths of exhaustion. But for my husband, it was different. He was always sensitive to noise, especially after a night of disrupted sleep. What seemed like ordinary morning sounds to my sister felt like a complete intrusion to him, shattering the fragile peace he was desperately clinging to. The frustration gradually built up inside him, and as the blender continued to roar in the kitchen, he could no longer endure it. Without hesitation, he sprang out of bed, rushed downstairs, ready to confront the person he believed was disrupting the little peace he so desperately needed. He woke up with a jolt, a sense of unease quickly creeping into his mind. In his groggy state, he listened to the sounds coming from downstairs, the clinking of kitchenware, the steady hum of a blender, completely at odds with the peaceful morning he had been hoping for. A thought flashed through his mind: had someone broken in? Without hesitation, he sat up, heart pounding with alertness. Descending the stairs with tense steps, he suddenly froze upon seeing my sister comfortably standing in the kitchen, preparing her breakfast as if this were her own home. His initial concern vanished, but in its place, a surge of irritation took over. He scanned the kitchen, now filled with noise and the sweet scent of blended fruit, and in that moment, all he felt was a violation of the already scarce personal space he had left. "What are you doing?" His voice came out harsher than he intended, the exhaustion and frustration seeping into every word. My sister turned around, looking slightly taken aback by his reaction. "I'm just making a smoothie. I texted to ask if I could come over. But we were still sleeping." He nearly shouted, his pent-up frustration finally boiling over. "You just let yourself in, making all this noise like this is your own place. Do you even know what kind of night we just had?" Later, he insisted that he had only used a frustrated tone, but from upstairs, I could hear the tension in his voice as clear as day. It wasn't the blender or my sister's footsteps that woke me, it was the collision of two opposing emotions, crashing together in our tiny kitchen. I hurriedly sat up, a growing sense of unease settling in as I realized a confrontation was unfolding right downstairs. He was completely upset that my sister had entered the house without prior notice, and his frustration only intensified when he saw how at ease she was using the blender, as if it were her own kitchen. A flicker of irritation crossed his eyes, and I could feel the atmosphere in the kitchen shift the moment I stepped in. He stood rigidly, hands braced against the counter, his expression dark with displeasure. His jaw was clenched tightly, as if he was trying to suppress something boiling inside. His entire posture screamed impatience, exhaustion from a sleepless night, frustration from his invaded privacy, and perhaps a deeper disappointment and feeling like he had lost control over his own home. My sister, in stark contrast, seemed unfazed by his reaction. She lifted her head to look at him, her eyes reflecting a mix of confusion and indifference. Maybe she truly didn't understand why her presence was triggering such a strong response. She leaned slightly against the counter, one hand holding her smoothie, the other resting casually on the blender lid, as if unaware of the tension thickening in the air. "What's wrong?" she asked, her tone slightly cautious but still carrying her usual nonchalance. My husband took a deep breath, as though searching for the right words to express his irritation. But even before he spoke, I knew this wasn't just about a smoothie or about my sister visiting too often. This was the tipping point for emotions that had been simmering for a long time, emotions he had never truly voiced before. He didn't wait to explain or temper his feelings. The air in our small kitchen was already heavy, but when he pointed a finger toward my sister, his voice laced with frustration, I felt everything begin to unravel. "She is the problem," he said sharply, each word cutting through the fragile silence like a knife. I blinked, caught off guard, but before I could react, he continued. And then, to my utter shock, he uttered a word I never imagined he would use to describe my sister, a freeloader. The kitchen fell into a deafening silence. The blender had long stopped whirring, but in my head, everything still echoed. My sister stood frozen, her eyes widening in disbelief as if she couldn't comprehend what she had just heard. I felt my heart clench. A wave of anger mixed with hurt rose in my chest, but I couldn't form any words right away. My husband had never been the type to lose his temper to the point of saying something so cruel. I understood his exhaustion, the stress of caring for a newborn, the frustration of constantly having someone in and out of our house. But to call my sister a freeloader? I turned to look at her. Her face had gone stiff, her fingers tightening around the smoothie glass as if trying to steady herself. A flash of pain crossed her eyes before she masked it with a defensive expression, one I had seen countless times when we were younger, whenever she felt hurt but refused to let anyone see. "I don't think I did anything wrong," she said softly, but there was a quiet firmness in her voice. It wasn't just a response, it was a declaration. I could feel the entire room teetering on the edge of an explosion. And at that moment, I knew this wasn't something that could be brushed aside like a minor disagreement. I stood there for a moment, feeling as though time had stretched out indefinitely. His words still rang in my mind, piercing some deep corner of my heart, leaving behind a heavy weight. I tried to process what had just been said, but each word felt like a sharp fragment, cutting into my thoughts and leaving behind an ache that wouldn't fade. The small kitchen, once a familiar and warm space, suddenly felt unbearably tense. An uncomfortable silence filled the room, so heavy that I could almost hear my own heartbeat pounding in my chest. The blender had just stopped, but its sound seemed to linger, blending with the quickened rhythm of my breathing. I glanced at my sister. Her eyes held a flicker of hurt, though she tried to mask it with a strained smile. I knew that tight grip on her glass, like it was the only thing anchoring her in that moment. Her pride was being tested, but my sister was never one to show weakness easily. She wouldn't argue or defend herself, she would simply retreat into silence, a protective reflex she had learned to shield herself from further pain. And it was that silence that broke my heart the most. A wave of shock washed over me. This wasn't just an offhand comment made in a moment of anger, it carried a deeper weight. It wasn't mere frustration, it felt like a judgment, a belief that had been simmering beneath the surface for some time. Did my husband truly think this way about my sister? Was this more than a passing irritation? Was it a long-standing opinion he had quietly harbored? A rising sense of unease crept into me. If he could think this way about my sister, did he feel the same about the rest of my family? Did he ever truly see them as a part of his life, or did he view them as intruders, disrupting the space that was meant to belong solely to us? These questions circled in my mind, each one heavier than the last, until I realized that this wasn't just a disagreement about a visit. It was about how we each viewed family, about the values we might never fully share. About a week or two ago, my husband had asked me to speak to my sister about her frequent visits after work. He told me it made him uncomfortable, that after a long, exhausting day, he wanted to come home to a quiet, peaceful space without constant visitors, even if they were family. But to me, my sister's presence was never a problem. In fact, I felt grateful for it. She wasn't just a guest dropping by, she was a supportive presence during one of the most challenging periods of my life. When the kitchen was a mess after hurried meals, she quietly cleaned up. When I was exhausted from sleepless nights, she held the baby and rocked him to sleep, giving me a few precious minutes of rest. More than that, my sister's visits gave my husband and me something invaluable, time together. Her help allowed us to have occasional date nights, even if they were just a quick dinner or a brief walk around the neighborhood. Those moments reminded us that beneath the chaos of parenting, we were still a couple. I thought my husband appreciated that, these rare opportunities we wouldn't have without her support. So when he expressed his discomfort, I tried to understand. I knew he wasn't used to having a bustling household or frequent visitors. As an only child, he had grown up in a quiet home where personal space was never compromised. But I still couldn't shake the feeling, was the problem really her visits, or was he misunderstanding the value she brought into our lives? After some discussion, we agreed that my sister would only visit on weekends, a compromise I thought was fair for everyone. I genuinely believed this solution would ease his concerns while allowing me to maintain my bond with her. But I was wrong. I soon realized that even after we reached that agreement, my husband's resentment toward her hadn't disappeared. It was like a slow-burning ember, no longer blazing but still radiating an uncomfortable heat. I saw it in the slight furrow of his brow whenever my sister walked through the door. I sensed it in his colder-than-usual responses when she tried to engage him in conversation. These reactions were subtle but impossible to ignore. I didn't understand why he still felt this way. Hadn't we already resolved the issue? My sister had respected our agreement. She only came over on weekends, tried to keep a low profile, and never intentionally caused any disruption. Yet, to my husband, her mere presence seemed to be an irritation in itself. And that troubled me. Was the real issue how often she visited, or was there something deeper, something unspoken, fueling his strong reaction? From my husband's perspective, I knew things looked different. After long days filled with stress, all he wanted was to come home to peace and quiet, a sanctuary where he could unwind without the constant hum of other people's presence. He once told me that life with a newborn was already chaotic enough, the midnight cries, the endless diaper changes, the sleepless hours spent soothing our child. And now, when he finally had a rare moment to breathe, my sister's frequent appearances felt like an intrusion on the one place where he craved solitude. I understood that. I knew he wasn't someone who liked having too many people in our home, especially when he was already exhausted. And if I placed myself in his shoes, perhaps I, too, would feel irritated to come home and find the house bustling instead of the calm I longed for. But I also understood my sister. I knew her intentions were nothing but kind, that she came over not to impose, but to help. She loved her nephew and wanted to ease my burden in any way she could. For me, her presence wasn't just practical support, it was emotional comfort. Whether it was her quietly cleaning the kitchen when I was too tired to stand, holding the baby while I stole a few moments of rest, or simply sharing a conversation to break the monotony, her presence made motherhood feel less isolating. And so, I found myself torn between two opposing needs. I agreed that her daily visits may have been too much for my husband. But at the same time, I couldn't help but feel that his strong reaction was unfair to someone who had done so much for us. I kept wondering, was there a way to balance both perspectives? Or, in the end, would one of them have to sacrifice their desires for the sake of the other? When we finally reached a clear agreement that my sister would only visit on weekends, I genuinely believed we had found a fair compromise. My sister could still visit, I could maintain our connection, and my husband would regain the quiet space he craved. It seemed like a solution that respected everyone's needs. But I had been too optimistic. Even after the agreement, his resentment lingered beneath the surface. It was no longer loud or direct, but I saw it in the smallest gestures, the way his smile faded when she entered, the edge in his voice when he responded to her questions. Little things that were easy to overlook but impossible to unsee. And that left me with a troubling question. Was this really about how often she visited? Or was there something deeper, something unspoken, that made her presence feel like such a heavy weight on his mind? So, I wasn't just upset, I was deeply disappointed when he used the term freeloader to describe my sister, especially after we had already agreed on a reasonable solution and after everything she had done to help our family. She didn't come over just for fun, she actively helped, cleaning the house, taking care of the baby, and even allowing us rare date nights to reconnect as a couple. Without her, I would have been far more exhausted. Yet, he dismissed all of that with one hurtful remark. He explained that what bothered him was how we ordered takeout more often when my sister was around. I could understand that, but was that difference significant enough to label her a freeloader? He also brought up the time she borrowed my car, something I had no issue with. At the time, I wasn't working, and he was working from home, so I borrowed his car and let my sister use mine. Yet, he seemed upset about it, as if I didn't have the right to make decisions about my own belongings. To me, these things were completely normal between siblings. We help each other when needed, without keeping score. But what frustrated me even more was his hypocrisy. He grew up with full financial support from his parents, received a car from them, and had help with the down payments for not just one, but 2 houses. Yet, when it came to my sister, he was harsh and judgmental, as if she were taking advantage of us. That made me wonder, does he see my entire family this way? And if he does, how am I supposed to deal with that? I truly understand his perspective. I know that after a long day at work, everyone wants a private space to relax and feel at peace in their home. I also don't deny that, after having a baby, we haven't had as much time for each other as before. But what upsets me is how he handled the situation. Rather than talking to me calmly, he let his emotions take over and lashed out at my sister. He said we barely have time for ourselves, and I couldn't argue with that. We rarely have intimate moments, and our sex life has nearly disappeared. But while I saw this as a natural consequence of exhaustion and the major changes that come with parenting, he blamed it entirely on my sister. That confused and disappointed me. Was she really the root of all our problems? Would everything suddenly be perfect if she stopped visiting? I didn't think so. I believed these changes were inevitable with a newborn, and that we needed to work through them together instead of pinning the blame on someone else. But he didn't seem to see it that way. And the difference in how we understood the issue was what worried me the most. My husband grew up as an only child, and I think that heavily shaped how he views family relationships. To me, sharing space, belongings, and helping each other out is natural. But to him, it seems unfamiliar. He never had to compromise with a sibling, never had to share his personal space, and never had a younger sibling constantly around. There's also the fact that he and my sister are nearly a decade apart in age. She's 26, and I'm 31. They don't have much in common, so they don't share a close bond. My sister and I grew up together, went through life's challenges side by side, and supported each other through difficult times. But my husband has never had that kind of relationship with his sister-in-law. To him, she might just feel like a frequent visitor, not an integral part of the family like she does to me. Maybe that's why he sees her presence as an intrusion rather than a form of support. But I can't help but feel hurt that he doesn't try to understand that, for me, my sister is not just a guest, she's family. Since that day, I've noticed that my husband no longer wants my sister in our home at all, even on weekends as we had agreed. Previously, he was only bothered by how often she visited after work. But now, his attitude has shifted completely. It's as if he doesn't want her in our lives in any capacity. That confuses me and feels unreasonable. First, my sister has helped us tremendously. She didn't come here to lounge around or take advantage of anything. On the contrary, she was always willing to help, whether it was cleaning, taking care of the baby, or giving us a rare moment of privacy. Plus, after he complained about how busy the house felt, we agreed to cut back on visits. She respected that. So why does he now want her gone entirely? I even apologized to my sister on his behalf, though I didn't think she was the one who needed an apology. I just didn't want things to become even more tense. But deep down, I knew this couldn't just be ignored. I couldn't let my husband treat my sister's existence as a problem, especially when she had done nothing wrong. This wasn't just a minor disagreement, it was a fundamental issue about how we view family, support, and boundaries in relationships. And if we didn't address it now, I feared it would turn into a much bigger rift in our marriage. Of everything that happened, what troubled me the most was my husband calling my sister a freeloader. I couldn't stop thinking about what that really meant. Was it just an angry outburst, or did it reveal something deeper about how he truly sees her? I tried to look at the situation objectively. I wasn't saying my sister was completely blameless. She shouldn't have dropped by unannounced, especially knowing how overwhelmed we were with the baby. But even if that was inconsiderate, did it warrant being called a freeloader? That wasn't who she was. She didn't come here to take advantage of us. She came because she loved her family and wanted to help. This makes me wonder, if he could say something like that about my sister, does he feel the same way about my entire family? Does he secretly see all of them as people who are taking advantage of us in some way? I had never considered that before, but now, I can't stop myself from having these doubts. Maybe the issue isn't just about my sister, it's about the fundamental differences in how we view family. I grew up in an environment where siblings were close and supported each other without keeping score. But my husband, who never had siblings, might not be familiar with that dynamic. To him, having someone frequently in his space, using his belongings, might feel like an intrusion rather than an expression of closeness, as I see it. Even so, I still can't accept the harsh words he used to describe my sister. I know we need to talk about this because if we don't address it, the distance between us will only grow. Ultimately, this situation isn't just about someone visiting too often or the inconveniences of daily life. It reflects deeper differences in our views on family, personal boundaries, and private space. I realize now that no matter how much we love each other, if we don't truly understand and respect each other's perspectives, even small disagreements can become major barriers in our relationship. The most important lesson I've learned is that communication and understanding are key to maintaining a happy family. If my husband and I don't openly share our feelings, resentment and frustration will build up over time, making our relationship increasingly tense. At the same time, setting clear boundaries with loved ones is essential, not only to protect our comfort as a couple but also to sustain healthy and lasting relationships with family members. This situation has made me realize that offering help doesn't always mean the help is welcomed, and not everyone shares the same definition of closeness in family relationships. The most important thing is to find a balance so that everyone feels respected and comfortable in their own home.